So we're ready for the final installment of the roof on this house. And what we're trying to accomplish now is a little porch roof. It's a low sloping roof. It's got hips on either side, and it's supported by columns and beams. Now in the project that I've given you, there are some columns and beams in here already. And all this video is going to focus on is how to modify and make these columns and beams correct. And then the next one, the last one, will be how to put in that hip roof. Okay, and if we investigate this and look closely at it, you can select on that beam and you recognize this is actually a wall. It's this basic wall here. That's how it's been created. Just like any other wall, it just happens to have a very high bottom constraint. In fact, the bottom constraint is the top of the wall. And then we've dropped it 1 foot from there. Let's just look at an elevation so that you can see a little more of what I mean by that. Here's my datum top of wall. Here's the beam. It extends to the top of wall, which basically means you could put a roof on top of it just like any other wall. And then the bottom of this beam, once again, is extended all the way up to this datum and then subtract a foot so that it looks like it's a beam with some thickness. It says over here that it's got 1 foot of total thickness. Okay, and that kind of implies that maybe this is a 2x12 beam. Now, you don't need to do the engineering on your house, so you don't know what beam size you need, but you can go with a 2x12, you can go with a 2x10. If you must, you can go with a 2x8. Any of those sizes will be fine. You can just guess one and go with whatever looks good. Now, if we investigate this just a little bit further still, I've got a section that I can use to show you more about this beam. This is what it looks like in section. So it looks like there are two pieces that are actually structural. These would be like LVLs. And there's a big gap right here, and then a finished material on the front and a finished material on the back. In this view, it almost looks as though those finished materials might be gypsum board, but that wouldn't be the case in the real world. Either this thing is going to be coated with plywood that gets painted, or maybe some LP smartboard, which is, it kind of looks like wood, but it doesn't rot. It's a manufactured material. Or maybe this whole thing just gets wrapped in some kind of a metal, so we don't see the beam at all and it's entirely protected. Now on the front side here, it's got a little extension before the finished material. And the fact that it's empty is not a good thing. Well, I'll have to fix that at some point, but that would just be a fur out, meaning we would put little blocks or pieces of wood in there to hold the finished material out a little bit further. And this is just for appearances. We don't have to do this at all, but it might just allow us to have our columns positioned correctly, or it might have something to do with where the roof is at and the look that we want with the beam and the roof interaction. So again, this is not a necessity. If you didn't want it or you want to change the configuration, you just simply go to edit type, edit the structure, and take out any layers or add any layers. So this one has a substrate of softwood lumber at 1.5 inches. That's the one I'm referring to here that you may not need at all. And then it's got a smartboard panel on the front, and I should just put that on the back also. Not that you really need to do this, but I'm just going to copy this and paste that in. We don't want gypsum wallboard outside. It doesn't do a very good job out there. Okay, so there is my there is my beam. And again, everywhere that I have a beam, the advantage is there's something there to hold up the roof. Okay, students often think that columns hold up the roof. Well, they do indirectly, but they actually hold up the beam that holds up the roof. In almost any application, you have to have something horizontal to carry the rafters or to carry the trusses. Okay, so now let's look at those columns. These are nothing more than 6x6 wood columns. They're very wonky at the moment. You can see that they don't really fit well or sit directly underneath that beam. And I did that on purpose, just to make things, just to make it so that you would have to figure out what to do. And this is probably an application you'd have on your own project. So I'm going to go into the first floor. And you notice here that we can see the columns, but we don't see the beam. Okay, so there's something very important here. If you didn't have this beam in here, if it wasn't just given to you, how would you get it there? Right? And you can start in your first floor. You can actually just draw it with a regular wall or the porch beam wall. Oh, by the way, why don't you just in your own projects, select this beam, Control C for copy, and then paste it into your project, and then you'll have that wall type. But as you create this wall, you could start drawing it and let it be a full-size wall and then just change the height of it later. Okay, that's one thing that you can do. And when you change the height, it will disappear from this view, which is why I actually like to just open up my ceiling plan, first floor, and you can see that the beam is visible here because the ceiling plan is looking at the first floor, but we're looking up now instead of looking down. And since the beam is high overhead, we can actually see it. And you can start drawing it here too. I can do create similar after selecting that beam. Make sure that your constraints are right. I want this thing to start up at the top of the wall minus a foot, and you can see I'm creating a new beam. Okay, so that's how you'll get yours in there. But back to this discussion of columns. And these columns right now, they all need to line up. And after you have your beam in, you know what to align them to. So if I go back into my ceiling plan, see if I can get a little more space here. What I'm going to do is use my align tool, AL for align. And then I'm going to come up here to some options, and I want to select multiple alignment. And that lets me pick several columns without having to redo the command each time. So I want multiple alignment, and I also want lock. And that means if the beam moves, the columns will move also. So the first thing is I'm going to come down here to my beam, and I'm going to hover until I see that blue line right here in the center, click on it, and then I'm going to go ahead and select a column right at its center. And that means the center of the beam, center of the column are now in alignment and they're locked. Okay, because I chose multiple alignment, I can go pick out more of these columns, and it shifts them right into place. That one looks like it's already aligned, but I still want it to lock, so I'm going to click on it, and same with this one. Okay, it looks like I've missed just one here. That one's going to put it outside of the beam running this way, but I can fix that on the next try. Okay, so now I'm going to go and hit escape so that I can start over. AL for align one more time. My settings are still there, and we'll get, I guess with one click, those two columns are now in alignment. They must have been aligned to each other. And then I'm going to hit escape and AL one more time so I can start over here on the right. And notice that this didn't really account for spacing. You know, if I move some of these columns, but I actually want the spacing to be consistent through here, then I'm going to have to go into my dimensioning tool and make these either equal or just spaced out however I want. Okay, and then also over here, let's see what this looks like in 3D. I want that column to, I would prefer that it actually was sitting on top of the beam, or sorry, the beam. I wish it was sitting on top of that column. And it's not really working, so I'll just pull that through and see what it does. Yeah, see, that looks better. Now the beam is on top, and over here the beam is on top, mostly on top, not quite. Okay, so let's go fix that. There we go. Okay. So now we have just one remaining problem, and that is, let's look at this in first floor ceiling plan. Oh, we are there. I'm going to hide the roof. HH. Okay, the problem remaining is that the distance from this beam to the wall, I can go to the center, that's fine, is 6 feet. And the distance on the other side is something different. And the distance on the front, at least to this wall, is something different again. So when we're looking at the finished product, and you notice that this hip runs perfectly up until it meets the corner of the house, that's only happening because of the spacing that I've used from the wall to each of my beams. And right now, we're not going to have that at all. You're going to have a line coming up, and it's going to look really awkward. It's going to hit the house somewhere in here, and then it's going to slope down and then run across the house. Well, the roof is going to slope down and then run across the house. And it doesn't look very good, and people don't try to do it, but oftentimes students don't know how to fix it. So the solution is, again, to make sure that whatever the distance you have from beam to wall is consistent on all three sides. I'll select this and tell it to be 10 feet. I'll select this one and tell it to be 10. It already is. I'll select this one and tell that to be 10 feet. And now I'm ready to start creating that roof. We're ready to do the hip. Let's look at it one more time in 3D and see that it looks like everything's been nice and cleaned up. And in the next video, we'll do the roof.